My name's Pete Woods, you're watching Hexham TV, and I'm here at the Boatside Inn in Warden, Northumberland, with Caroline Lucas, co-chair of the Green Party and MP for Brighton. Caroline, what are you doing here in Warden?
Well, I'm having a wonderful time. I've come to meet in particular with Wesley Foote, who is the local candidate for the local elections next year in this area. And he's been showing me the impact of the flooding of last December. And it's been really shocking to recognise just how seriously this area was affected, how seriously this pub itself was affected. It's been very inspiring to hear the stories about how people came together to try to get rid of the worst of the floods and how they helped one another at that time 12 months ago. But it's raised some other questions too, I think, about the kind of support we need to see from the local authority, from the Environment Agency, from the government, to try to make sure that areas like this are less vulnerable to flooding in the future.
And do you think enough is being done? What other sorts of things can take place? What would you like to see?
I think there's lots more that can be built on some good work that started. I take some hope from the fact that there does seem to be a lot more local coordination now, and much more ways of keeping in touch with the surrounding areas, so there's a much quicker way of sharing information and ensuring that what gets done in one area helps rather than harms what happens in another area. But I think we do want to see more finances. That's the bottom line when it comes to flood defences. I think we want to see as well some more natural flood defence spending, and I worry that sometimes flood work can sometimes feel as if it's more to do with concrete and dredging rather than with some of the natural flood defence mechanisms which do work very well. I think as well, of course, what we want to see is less building in the floodplains and more government action on some of the causes of the kinds of freak weather we've been seeing. And to the extent that, although you can't ever say one particular event was associated with climate change, what we can say is that climate change is making events like the freak flooding here more likely. And therefore, I think we need to have redoubled efforts really from the government to be getting us away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy alternatives.
And Caroline, we're in an area of rural Northumberland here in Warden and Hexham, and there's a lot of poverty affecting people in these areas, well, right across the country, but rural poverty sometimes goes unnoticed by many. What have the Green Party got to say about cuts to local authorities and cuts to central government funding?
Well, you're absolutely right to say that rural poverty can often be the area of poverty that is often overlooked, that it's not so visible perhaps, but it is very, very serious and very deep. And so I guess what I would say is that in Parliament what we've been doing is absolutely challenging the way in which the government is giving tax breaks to richer people and paying for that essentially by driving yet more cuts to welfare for some of the poorest people. I worry as well that things like public transport infrastructure often gets overlooked. So while the government is putting money into something like HS2, which is very good for business people perhaps who are going to London and it shaves a few minutes off their journey, that money should be being spent, for example, on rural bus services, rural train services and so on, which are really benefiting ordinary people, because right now the cost of living in some rural areas is skyrocketing. People can't afford to keep their homes warm because of the price of fuel and because oftentimes their homes aren't particularly insulated, so we need to have a rollout of free insulation for some of the poorest homes. At the same time, we need to see more affordable public transport, more affordable housing. And I know people will say that costs money, of course it does, but we are the 5th or 6th richest economy in the world. It's a question of political priorities. And I think what we need to see is a redirection of finances so that it is helping people in some of the poorest rural areas and making sure that their lives are stable and prosperous as well.
Caroline Lucas, co-chair of the Green Party and MP for Brighton, thank you very much for talking to Hexham TV.
Thank you.